The Russian army's numerous victories on the battlefield and its control of vast territories have placed Ukraine and the entire West at a significant disadvantaged position in the forthcoming peace talks with Moscow. By the way, if we look back at history, we can see that Russia has always been in a dominant and very advantageous position during all the negotiations. The fact is that this is Moscow's favorite tactic. Russians understand that any conflicts and wars inevitably lead to negotiations. That's why they aim to dominate the battlefield, by gaining control of as many territories as possible. All this allows them to be in the status of winner during the negotiation process, and dictate their terms when signing any peace agreements. The same thing happened during World War II, when Russia and the United States decided the fate of Europe and the entire post-war world. Back then, thanks to the major successes of the Soviet army on the battlefield, Joseph Stalin noticeably dominated his opponents during the Yalta Conference, and at the negotiations in Tehran. As a result, the West had to agree to all the conditions set by Joseph Stalin. In the 21st century, Russia used the same tactics during the war in Georgia in 2008. And during the Syrian conflict in 2016. As a result, the West once again had to make serious concessions during the negotiation process with Moscow. And now in 2025, everything that happens on the battlefield in Ukraine indicates that history will repeat itself again. And at the upcoming peace talks, the West will once again have to agree and accept all of Russia's conditions. By the way, as of February 26, 2025, Russia continues to improve and strengthen its position in the upcoming peace talks with the West. In particular, a few hours ago, war correspondents reported on the Russian army's next major successes in key directions of the front. So, on February 25, at 10 a.m. Moscow time, Russian troops completely liberated the settlement of Pyatikatki, in the Zaporizhia direction of the front. Moreover, on the same day, Russian troops entered the settlement of Shcherbaki, and drove out Ukrainian army units from the eastern part of this urban-type village. On February 25, the Russian army's successes were also recorded in the Pokrovsk direction of the front. In particular, units of the groups of troops under the designation Zapad liberated the settlement of Zaporizhia. Building on its success, the Russian army also entered the settlement of Preobrazhenka on the move. And literally 4 hours later, Preobrazhenka was also completely liberated. Thus, in this sector of the front, the Russian army approached the border of the Dnipropetrovsk region at a distance of 3 kilometers. It is also worth noting the Russian army's major successes in Kursk direction of the front. As it turned out, on February 25, units of the groups of troops under the designation Sever completely liberated the settlements of Pogrebki and Orlovka, north of the city of Sudza. Simultaneously with this, the Russian army continues to build on its success in Sumy region. After the capture of the settlement of Novinkoy by Russian troops, and the advance towards Basavka, the Ukrainian command lost the opportunity to freely use the main route to supply the Ukrainian grouping in the city of Sudza. Against this backdrop, reports began to appear that the Ukrainian army units were preparing to retreat from the Kursk region. Some Russian war correspondents also confirmed this information. According to them, signs of the impending retreat of the Ukrainian troops really began to appear in the Kursk region. Meanwhile, insiders in Kiev have once again begun to report a deterioration of emotional and psychological condition of the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky. It is reported that on February 24, Zelensky had another nervous breakdown. It is noteworthy that the condition of the illegitimate Ukrainian president worsened immediately after the European leaders held a summit in Kiev. It seems that this political clown no longer believes in the promises of his European masters. It seems that this dead man walking has really begun to realize that his days are numbered. Moreover, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is still in Kiev. As it turned out, Boris Johnson is in Kiev to convince Zelensky not to sign an agreement with Washington on the transfer of mineral resources to the United States, in return for repayment of a multi-billion-dollar debt. According to Boris Johnson, the United States, led by Donald Trump, is an unreliable partner, as the current owner of the White House has obvious pro-Russian views. Boris Johnson also urged Zelensky not to repay the debt to the United States. The former British Prime Minister claims that Trump's proposed rare minerals deal with the United States is a real scam, designed to completely destroy Ukraine. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that in March 2022, during the peace talks in Istanbul between Ukraine and Russia, Boris Johnson also gave similar advice to Zelensky. Boris Johnson was even able to convince the Kiev authorities to abandon the agreements reached in Istanbul. As a result, Ukraine lost Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson regions. In addition, the Ukrainian army lost more than 1 million soldiers, while the country itself, as a result of constant massive missile strikes, was actually sent to the Stone Age. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron, during an interview with American journalists from Fox News, said that he fully supported the algorithm proposed by Donald Trump to achieve a peaceful settlement of the conflict. In particular, he said that a ceasefire would be declared in Ukraine. And during this temporary truce, presidential elections will be held in Ukraine in order to prepare the ground for the signing of a peace treaty that will include security guarantees for the fighting parties. Macron also added that in order to ensure Ukraine's security, a peacekeeping contingent consisting exclusively of military units from European countries should be deployed in this country. Russia's reaction to these statements by the French president was not long in coming. In particular, the ambassador at large of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Rodion Myroshnik, said that Russia would never agree even to a temporary ceasefire. According to him, the fighting in Ukraine will stop only when Russia is confident that all Moscow's demands have been met, and Ukraine no longer poses a threat not only to Russia, but also to other neighboring states. Moreover, the Russian diplomat also noted that soldiers from Western countries will never be allowed into Ukraine. At the same time, he admitted that Europe would most likely be allowed to participate in the negotiation process, but at the same time, European countries would be deprived of the right to make important decisions and tell Russia what to do. Thus, Russia has once again made it clear that the West will have to come to terms with the fact that the current conflict will end only on Moscow's terms.